Karen stormed into our yard, screaming at my wife about illegal plants. She pointed, threatened, and called us rule breakers. Within minutes, voices were raised, and the whole street was watching. But Karen didn't realize who lived right next door, until the sheriff stepped out with the law in his hand. I heard the shouting before I saw her. It came sharp through the screen door, a brittle voice that made my wife freeze beside the planter boxes. "Those are illegal," Karen yelled from the sidewalk, one hand on her hip, the other jabbing toward the blooms. "HOA rules. Read them." The morning had started gentle, hose hissing, birds stitching the air with sound, my wife kneeling on the strip of soil she'd nursed for months. The roses were small, rooted in terracotta pots that sat inside the bed like careful guests. She wore my old baseball cap and a smile that belonged to Saturdays. The shout snatched it away. I stepped onto the porch. "Everything okay?" Karen didn't look at me. She took 3 quick steps up the walk as if the concrete belonged to her, sunglasses sliding down her nose. "Your wife is installing prohibited species. They attract pests, they lower curb appeal, and they violate the landscape plan." Page 7. My wife stood, brushing dirt from her knees. "They're roses," she said, voice steady. "Heritage tea roses. I propagated them from a cutting from my mom's garden." Karen barked a laugh like a door slamming. "I don't care if the queen herself planted them. This neighborhood has standards." She pivoted, raising her voice so it carried to the porches around us. We all agreed to standards. Across the cul-de-sac, blinds fluttered. Slowly, I walked down the steps and stopped at the edge of our path. "Karen, if there's a rule, show it to me." She squared her shoulders. "I don't need to show you anything. I'm on the architectural committee." She tapped her chest. "We approve drought-tolerant natives only. Those," her finger stabbed the air, "are unapproved." My wife met my eyes. The roses gleamed behind her, petals curled with that fragile confidence flowers have before full bloom. "We put them in pots on purpose," she said. "If the board asked, we could reposition them. We're trying to be respectful." "Respectful?" Karen's mouth curved. "Respectful is following rules instead of sneaking in contraband plants at dawn." "Contraband?" I said. "They're flowers, not fireworks." Mr. Patel from 2 houses down drifted closer, hands in his hoodie. "I like the color," he offered, tentative. "Brightens the corner." Karen didn't break eye contact with us. "This doesn't concern you." Then louder, for the street. "If we start letting people do whatever they want, what's next? Pink flamingos? Shit. Chickens?" I kept my voice even. "Again, show me the rule." She pulled out her phone, scrolling with theatrical sighs. "Page 7, she repeated. "Landscape uniformity. No thorned, invasive, or nuisance species. Roses are thorned. Case closed." My wife spoke before I could. "Roses aren't invasive. And nuisance requires a board vote after notice, not a Saturday morning ambush." For a beat, Karen blinked. Then she recovered. "Consider this notice." A chuckle rolled from somewhere behind us. Phones lifted. My wife set her trowel on the brick. She wasn't crying, but her throat worked like she was swallowing glass. I stepped closer to Karen, leaving space. "Listen. My wife's mother passed last year. These cuttings were all we could save. We cleared the color with the palette. We kept them in pots. We're not trying to start a fight." "Then don't," Karen said brightly. "Remove them by noon and there's no fine." "What fine?" I asked. $200 per day until the violation's corrected," she said. "We can also suspend your amenity privileges." "We don't use the pool," my wife murmured. "Then this should be easy." Mr. Patel tried again. "Karen, I don't think." She snapped. "Do you sit on the committee, Raj?" His face cooled. "It's Mr. Patel." He stepped back. Karen returned her gaze to us, victorious. "Noon," she repeated. "Or I call the president and start paperwork." I breathed in, tasting the metallic edge of anger. "We'll review the bylaws." I looked at the roses, then at my wife. She straightened her shoulders, that small gesture she makes when she's pushing through fear. "We're not removing them." Karen's laugh bounced off driveways. "You think pots make you special? It's still a violation. I've already had 3 neighbors complain." From the corner, a woman called, "I didn't complain." Another voice, "Me neither." Karen's jaw tightened. "Do you want this neighborhood to look like a yard sale?" She raised her phone and angled it at the roses, snapping pictures. "Evidence," she announced. "In case you decide to get cute." "Please stop filming me," my wife said, quiet. Karen pivoted the camera to her face. "Then comply." Our next-door neighbor's brass knocker caught the sun, flaring like a signal. I felt the prickle of being watched multiply. This wasn't just a disagreement anymore, it was theater. I met my wife's eyes. "Go inside," I whispered. She shook her head. "I'm staying." Something in me steadied. I pulled my own phone and opened the PDF of the bylaws we downloaded when we moved in. I searched Rose. 0 results. Thorn. Nothing. I scrolled to page 7 and read, "Maintain consistent appearance, no invasive species, board may designate nuisance after vote." I read it out loud. Karen waved a hand. "Interpretation belongs to the committee. Vote belongs to the board," I said. "Which you are not." Her lips thinned. "I'm on the committee." "Committee recommends," I said. "Board decides. Meanwhile, this is our property." A door slammed across the way. The audience was growing, Mrs. Decker in her visor, Marcus in work boots, a couple we didn't know, arms folded. Karen slid her sunglasses up, eyes bright with the thrill of contest. "You're going to regret this." "Maybe," I said. "But not today." She glanced at her screen, thumb hovering. "You leave me no choice." "What are you doing?" my wife asked. Karen smiled. "Calling the HOA president right now." She hit contacts, tapped a name and raised the phone so everyone could hear the first ring, second and a third, and just as a voice began to answer. The HOA president's voice crackled faintly through Karen's speakerphone. "Hello? Karen?" She lifted the phone higher, turning in a slow circle so the whole cul-de-sac could hear. "Yes, Mr. Hammond, I'm at the Miller's house right now. They've planted prohibited species in their yard. Clear violation of Section 7. Her tone carried the conviction of a prosecutor, every syllable sharpened like glass. My wife crossed her arms, dirt still streaking her forearms from the soil. "They're in pots, Karen. My mother's roses. You're twisting the rules." Karen spun back toward her, sunglasses flashing. "Don't talk back when I'm reporting you." I stepped closer. "Put him on speaker." Karen obliged with relish. "You hear that, Mr. Hammond? They want to argue with you too." The president's voice came tired and muffled, as if he'd been pulled from Saturday breakfast. Karen calmed down. "What plants are we talking about?" "Roses," she snapped. "Thorned, nuisance roses, bright red, tacky, gaudy, and completely unapproved." There was a pause. A fork clinked against a plate. "Roses aren't prohibited, Karen. We've never banned roses." Karen's eyes flickered, but she doubled down. "Well, they should be. They attract pests. They're an eyesore. They don't belong in uniform landscapes." The line crackled again. "We'll review it at the next meeting," Hammond said finally, his voice weary. "But I can't enforce anything today. Goodbye, Karen." The call ended before she could protest. The silence that followed was heavier than thunder. A few neighbors snickered, one coughed into his sleeve. My wife allowed herself a small smile. "See." But Karen wasn't finished. She thrust the phone into her pocket and took 2 strides toward the roses. "You think you've won?" "Not yet. If the board drags its feet, I'll escalate. We'll bring the city in. We'll call code enforcement. Do you know what fines they can impose?" She knelt suddenly, angling her camera right into the soil bed, clicking pictures of every petal. "Weeds. Nuisance. Violation." My wife stepped forward, voice trembling but firm. "Don't film me. Don't touch my mother's plants." Karen smirked, phone still raised. "If you didn't want trouble, you should have stuck to gravel." I could feel the crowd leaning in. Mrs. Decker murmured, "Good grief." Marcus muttered, "It's just flowers." Karen's voice rose, catching the wind. "This is about respect. If they get away with this, what's next? Motorhomes and driveways? Neon paint? Trashy ornaments?" The heat rose in my chest. "Karen, you're making a spectacle out of nothing." She squared off with me just a foot away. "Nothing? I've spent 15 years protecting this neighborhood. I won't let one couple undo it." "You mean protecting your power?" I said quietly. Her face flushed crimson. "You'll regret that." And then, with the theatrics of a stage actress, she raised the phone again. "Fine. If the board won't enforce it, the police will. I'm calling them right now." The crowd gasped, whispers slicing through the air. Mr. Patel muttered, "That's going too far." Karen's thumb pressed the screen, and we all heard the flat electronic beeps of 911 being dialed. My wife's hand clutched my arm. "She wouldn't." "She would," I said. The operator answered, voice professional, 911, what's your emergency?" Karen's tone turned urgent, breathless. "Yes, I'd like to report a violation and disturbance." A couple on my street is harboring illegal plants. They're threatening me. Gasps broke out from the neighbors. One of them hissed, "Did she just say illegal plants?" I stepped forward. "Karen, hang up. This isn't an emergency." She raised her chin, speaking louder so the operator could hear. "They're aggressive, hostile. I feel unsafe in my own neighborhood." The lies landed heavy in the air. My wife's eyes widened, her mouth opening in disbelief. "What? I've barely spoken." I could hear the dispatcher's voice. "Ma'am, are you in immediate danger?" "Yes," Karen cried. "They're intimidating me." She backed up a step for effect, though no one had moved toward her. "Unbelievable," Marcus muttered from across the street. Phones rose higher, several neighbors recording now. I tried to keep my voice steady. "Ma'am, there's no danger here," I said toward the phone. "We're standing in our yard and she's harassing us." Karen pressed the phone to her chest and hissed, "Shut up." Then into the line, "Please send someone quickly." She ended the call with a sharp tap and slipped the phone into her pocket. My wife whispered, "She really did it." Karen turned to the gathering crowd, her smirk returning. "Now we'll see who's in the right. When the police get here, you'll wish you'd never defied me." The tension in the cul-de-sac thickened, like the air before a summer storm. A few neighbors shook their heads and drifted back to their porches, not wanting to be on record. Others lingered, phones rolling, unwilling to miss what came next. Karen planted herself at the edge of our lawn like a sentry, arms crossed, waiting. My wife's hands trembled as she touched the nearest rose, almost as if to protect it. "We didn't do anything wrong," she whispered. I put my arm around her shoulders. "I know." But even as I spoke, a sound began to rise in the distance, faint at first, then swelling unmistakably. The sharp, pulsing wail of a siren. Neighbors exchanged wide-eyed glances. Mrs. Decker put a hand to her mouth. Marcus muttered, "She actually brought them out for flowers." The siren grew louder, closer, until blue and red light washed briefly against the pale siding of the nearest house. Karen straightened, triumphant. "Justice is coming," she announced. The siren cut, tires crunched gravel, and a cruiser rolled slowly into the cul-de-sac. The officer's silhouette shifted inside the car, radio crackling. The neighborhood seemed to hold its breath. Karen's smile widened. She turned back toward us, eyes gleaming. "Now you're really going to learn how rules work." The patrol car eased to a stop at the curb, engine idling. The door latch clicked. And as the officer began to step out, the cruiser rolled to a stop at the edge of the cul-de-sac, its headlights glaring across the neatly trimmed lawns. The officer stepped out slowly, not with urgency, but with the tired posture of someone who'd already seen too much nonsense this shift. He adjusted his belt, glanced at Karen, then at the roses. Karen was ready. She surged forward, hand raised high as if summoning a jury. "Officer, over here. They're in violation, harboring prohibited plants." The neighbors rippled with nervous laughter. Mr. Patel muttered under his breath, "Harboring plants?" The officer held up a hand. "Ma'am, slow down. Tell me exactly what the issue is." Karen launched into her performance, words firing like bullets. "They've planted roses. Roses with thorns. That's against HOA rules. I've asked them to remove them and they refused. Now the entire neighborhood is at risk of property devaluation. They're aggressive, hostile, and I don't feel safe." My wife gasped. "That's not true." I stepped forward. "Officer, this is a dispute about flowers. She trespassed into our yard, harassed my wife, and then called you under false pretenses." The officer's eyes moved between us, weighing tone, posture, the crowd. His gaze lingered on the neighbors with phones out. "Anybody here witness what happened?" A chorus of voices answered. "She was screaming at them. They didn't threaten her. She called 911 over roses." Karen whirled on the crowd, her face a storm. "You're all blind. If we let this go, we'll have chaos. Junk cars on lawns, chickens in coops, trampolines in driveways." "Some of us wouldn't mind a trampoline," Marcus said flatly. The laughter that followed wasn't loud, but it was enough to make Karen's cheeks flame red. The officer looked back at her. "Ma'am, this doesn't sound like an emergency." Her voice cracked with indignation. "It is an emergency. They're undermining the HOA, destroying the look of the neighborhood, and now they're making me out to be the villain." "Because you are," my wife whispered, barely audible, but close enough for Karen to hear. Karen snapped her head around. "Excuse me?" My wife's shoulders squared. "You could have knocked. You could have spoken kindly. Instead, you screamed at me in front of everyone." The officer raised his palms. "All right, enough. No more yelling. This is what we're going to do. But Karen cut him off. You're going to issue them a citation. For violating property codes. I demand it. The officer's jaw flexed. I can't issue a citation for HOA rules. That's not how the law works. The crowd murmured agreement. Phones tilted closer, catching every word. Karen sputtered. Then what good are you? The officer glanced at her, unimpressed. Ma'am, I respond to crimes, not gardening disputes. That line hit the crowd like a slap. A ripple of laughter, quickly muffled, spread down the block. Karen's eyes darted around, wild, searching for an ally. You'll all regret mocking me, she spat. This isn't over. The HOA will fine them daily until they submit. Show us the rule, Marcus said. Karen ignored him, pacing the sidewalk like a lawyer rehearsing her closing argument. She pulled out her phone again, scrolling furiously. Page 7, she repeated, though her voice lacked its earlier conviction. Landscape uniformity. I lifted my own phone, scrolling through the PDF again. It says no invasive species and nothing deemed a nuisance after a board vote. Roses are neither. Show me where it says we can't have roses. Her face tightened. It's implied. Mr. Patel spoke up, his voice steady now. No, Karen. You make up rules when it suits you. That's a lie, she barked. Then prove it, he challenged. Karen froze, thumb trembling over her phone screen. For the first time her confidence cracked. The officer crossed his arms. Here's the bottom line. I'm not writing a report unless there's trespass or harassment. HOA bylaws aren't enforceable by police. He looked at me. Do you want to press charges for trespass? I hesitated, feeling every neighbor's eyes on me. Not yet. We just want her to stop. Karen's voice broke into a shrill laugh. See? Even they know they can't touch me. But the officer didn't laugh. He raised his radio, speaking low into the mic, dispatch, status check. His gaze swept the street again, then locked briefly on the house next door, our sheriff neighbor's house. Karen noticed the glance and sneered. Yes, maybe you should call for backup. Reinforcements. I won't be bullied by them or by this mob of so-called neighbors. The officer lowered the radio, his expression unreadable. Backup might not be necessary, he said slowly. The neighbors leaned in, sensing something. Karen folded her arms, triumphant again. Good. At least someone's taking this seriously. But the officer wasn't looking at her anymore. His gaze was fixed firmly on the house to our right. Curtains stirred, and a heavy wooden door creaked open. A figure stepped out onto the porch, framed in the golden light of late morning. A tall man, broad-shouldered, crisp uniform shirt tucked in, a gleam of silver pinned over his chest. Our neighbor. Sheriff Daniels. The cul-de-sac exhaled in unison, whispers darting like sparks. That's the sheriff. Oh no, Karen's done now. Karen turned, confused, then froze. For the first time all morning, her face drained of color. The sheriff adjusted his hat and began walking toward us, each step deliberate, his presence pulling every gaze in the street. The officer nodded in respect, stepping back. Karen stammered, What are you doing here? The sheriff stopped at the edge of our lawn, eyes calm but hard. He raised his voice so the whole crowd could hear. Karen, he said evenly, you've just lied to law enforcement. The cul-de-sac fell silent the moment Sheriff Daniels stepped off his porch. His boots struck the pavement with steady rhythm, each sound echoing like a gavel. Even the birds seemed to quiet. He wasn't rushing, but there was weight in every movement, the kind of weight that comes from authority earned, not borrowed. Karen's bravado wavered. She fumbled with her sunglasses, sliding them up to her forehead. Sheriff Daniels, I didn't realize you were home, she stammered. The sheriff's gaze didn't waver. Karen, I heard the call over the scanner. And I heard your words just now. You told dispatch you felt threatened. That wasn't true, was it? Karen's lips parted, but no words came. My wife clutched my arm. The roses behind her swayed gently in the morning breeze, oblivious to the storm unraveling before them. The uniformed officer who had first arrived straightened and gave a respectful nod. Sheriff. Daniels acknowledged him with the smallest tilt of his head, then turned his eyes back to Karen. You lied to an emergency operator. That's a criminal offense. Do you understand that? Karen's face flushed crimson. She waved a hand toward us. I didn't lie. They were threatening. Look at them standing there with their weeds. Their flowers, my wife said softly, though the words trembled. The sheriff let the quiet hang heavy before speaking again. Karen, these folks aren't breaking any laws. HOA guidelines aren't criminal statutes. The officer here can't enforce your personal interpretation of the rules. The neighbors whispered, recording every second. One of them chuckled under his breath, quickly muffling it when Karen shot him a glare. Karen folded her arms, chin jutting stubbornly. Well, if the HOA can't count on the police, then what's the point of having rules at all? The point, Sheriff Daniels said, stepping closer until he stood at the edge of our walkway, is community. Respect. Balance. You enforce that with cooperation, not harassment. His words cut sharper than any raised voice. Karen's jaw worked, but nothing came out. The sheriff crouched briefly, brushing a finger over one of the roses. These are heritage cuts. You took good care transplanting them, he said to my wife. His tone softened just for her. Your mother would be proud. Tears brimmed in her eyes. She nodded. Thank you. Karen sputtered. So you're taking their side? The sheriff rose, towering over her now. I'm taking the side of the law. And right now, the law says you had no business trespassing onto their property, screaming threats, or tying up emergency resources with a false report. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Karen tried to laugh, but it came out brittle. Oh, come on. You wouldn't charge me for trying to protect the neighborhood. The officer who had arrived first cleared his throat. Sheriff, if you want me to document trespass and harassment, I can open a case. Karen's eyes bulged. A case? Against me? The sheriff gave her a long, steady look. If it were anyone else, you'd already be in cuffs. That broke the dam. The neighbors whispered fiercely now, some nodding, some smiling. Marcus muttered, about time. Karen whirled on them. You ungrateful hypocrites. I fought for this neighborhood for years. You think you'd have pristine streets without me? You'd drown in chaos without my standards. But her words only seemed to shrink against the tide of murmurs. The community she thought she controlled wasn't with her anymore. She turned back to the sheriff, her voice cracking. This is a misunderstanding. That's all. The sheriff's face was carved from stone. No, Karen. This is a pattern. And it stops today. The officer stepped closer, notebook out. Sheriff, do you want me to take statements from the neighbors? Yes, Daniel said. And start with these two. He gestured toward me and my wife. Karen sputtered, frantic now. You can't do this. You can't let them ruin everything I've built. The sheriff's eyes narrowed. Karen, what you've built is fear. And fear doesn't last. A hush fell over the cul-de-sac. The only sound was the scratch of the officer's pen as he began writing. Karen tried one last time to claw back control. If you cite me, I'll appeal. I'll take it to the board. I'll take it to court. The sheriff took one deliberate step forward. Karen shrank back instinctively. You're welcome to try. But remember this, the law will always be louder than your threats. The weight of those words lingered in the air, pressing down on her like the summer sun. My wife exhaled shakily, leaning against me. For the first time all morning, I felt the tension in my chest ease. The roses behind us glowed in the light, defiant, unbothered. The sheriff glanced once more at Karen, then at the officer. Finish your notes. I'll explain the statutes in detail. Karen clenched her fists, but her voice was barely a whisper. This isn't over. The sheriff heard her. He leveled one final look. For your sake, I hope it is. The neighbors murmured again, phone still recording, tension still humming. The sheriff's words had turned the tide, but we all knew the storm wasn't done. And then, just as the officer closed his notebook, Sheriff Daniels looked back at Karen and said evenly, because if it isn't, I'll have no choice but to tell you exactly which law you've been breaking. The street had never been so still. Every lawn mower, every barking dog, every car engine seemed to have gone silent, as if the entire cul-de-sac was holding its breath. Sheriff Daniels stood tall at the edge of our walkway, his badge catching the sun, and for once Karen had no words ready to throw. But it didn't last. Karen forced a shaky laugh, trying to gather scraps of her old bravado. Well, this is perfect then. If you're here, Sheriff, then you can enforce the HOA rules. Finally, someone with actual authority. The neighbors' heads turned in unison, eyes narrowing. Even the officer on scene raised an eyebrow. Danielle's gaze didn't soften. Karen, HOA rules aren't state law. They're contracts between homeowners and the board. My badge doesn't exist to enforce your personal crusades. Karen's cheeks burned bright red, but she straightened her shoulders. That's where you're wrong. If they violate rules, it's your job to step in. We can't have people doing whatever they want. It's anarchy. Marcus called from across the street, his voice steady and unimpressed. Anarchy is calling 911 over roses, Karen. A ripple of chuckles followed, muffled behind hands. Phones tilted closer. Karen spun on him, shouting, You don't understand. Once one person breaks the rules, the whole neighborhood collapses. Do you want weeds everywhere? Do you want trash cans on the street all week? Do you want peace and quiet? Mrs. Decker cut in sharply. Because I sure do. And you're the one stealing it. The crowd hummed with approval. Karen's mouth snapped shut, trembling with outrage. Sheriff Daniels took a deliberate step closer, his presence filling the space between us. His voice was calm, but there was iron in it. Karen, let me explain something you seem to have forgotten. HOAs can fine people, yes. They can write stern letters. But they cannot criminalize behavior that state law doesn't forbid. And calling 911 to pretend you're in danger? That's misuse of emergency services. Karen's eyes widened. She tried to wave him off. I panicked. They were yelling at me. I spoke then, my voice firm. We didn't raise our voices until you trespassed and started shouting. My wife asked you to stop filming her. That's all. My wife's voice shook, but she held her ground. You humiliated me in my own yard. 4 flowers. For my mother's roses. The sheriff's gaze flicked between us, then locked back on Karen. And you trespassed while doing it? Trespassing is a real offense. False reports are a real offense. You're lucky I haven't cuffed you yet. The officer by the cruiser nodded, notebook still in hand. Sheriff, I can add those charges to the case if you want. Karen's bravado crumbled, her mouth working soundlessly. She turned, scanning the crowd for sympathy, but found none. Neighbors avoided her gaze or raised their phones higher. Finally she snapped, desperate. This is bias. You're siding with them because you like them. You can't be objective. You're their neighbor. The sheriff's face didn't change, but the silence that followed felt like the final nail. When he spoke, his tone was absolute. Karen, the truth doesn't need me to be objective. It stands on its own. The crowd murmured in agreement. Karen's eyes glistened, though whether with anger or fear, no one could tell. She pulled her sunglasses back down as if hiding behind them. You're all going to regret this. Every single one of you. But the words rang hollow. Daniel straightened fully, shoulders squared. Here's what's going to happen. The officer is going to finish his notes. Statements will be taken. The board can review your conduct, and you may face a citation for harassment and trespass. And if you misuse 911 again, I won't hesitate to make an arrest. Karen's lips parted, but no sound came. My wife whispered, finally. Karen turned toward us, her expression twisting. This isn't over. They'll regret planting those weeds. The sheriff didn't flinch. Karen, he said, his voice sharp as the crack of a whip, the only one who'll regret something here is you if you keep this up. The crowd murmured again, and even the officer gave a slow shake of his head. Karen's hands shook as she fumbled with her phone. She started pacing, muttering to herself. I'll appeal. I'll sue. Oh. But her words drowned under the quiet authority of Danielle's voice. Enough. He let the silence stretch, his eyes locked on hers until she finally stopped pacing. And then he added, for all to hear, because if you don't stop, we're going to start talking about the violations you've been hiding on your property. The neighbors gasped audibly. Karen froze mid-step, face pale now, her bravado cracked wide open. My wife looked at me confused. Violations? She whispered. The sheriff's eyes never left Karen's. His voice was low, deliberate, each word chosen with care. Yes. The ones you don't want this neighborhood to know about. The crowd leaned in, hungry for the reveal. Cameras zoomed closer. Karen's lips trembled. You wouldn't. The sheriff's expression didn't change. Try me. The air tightened around us, thick as wet cement. Nobody moved, not even the officer with the notebook. All eyes locked on Karen and Sheriff Daniels, two forces colliding in the middle of our quiet cul-de-sac. Karen's bravado flickered like a candle in wind. Violations? She croaked, the word barely audible. The sheriff folded his arms across his chest, the badge gleaming against his shirt. Yes, Karen. You've spent years lording over this neighborhood, quoting rules at everyone else. But you've ignored the ones that apply to you. Gasps rolled through the crowd like a wave. Neighbors leaned forward, hungry for the reveal. Karen shook her head violently. No. You don't know what you're talking about. Danielle's eyes narrowed. You think I don't notice the unpermitted additions behind your house? Or the surveillance cameras you've angled toward other people's property without their consent? Or that oversized shed you built last spring, hidden behind lattice fencing, in violation of setback requirements? Karen's mouth opened, then shut again. The crowd buzzed. Marcus muttered, knew that shed wasn't legal. Mrs. Decker nodded. She films my grandkids every time they play in the driveway. Karen's voice pitched higher. Those aren't violations. They're improvements. Enhancements. They raise property values. The sheriff's tone stayed even, almost surgical. Call them what you want. But the HOA handbook you wave around? It applies to you too. And you've broken more sections than anyone else on this street. The officer by the cruiser cleared his throat, pen hovering. Sheriff, do you want me to document those as well? Karen whirled on him. Don't you dare write that down. The officer blinked slowly, unimpressed, and kept writing. Karen spun back to Daniels, desperation leaking into her voice. You can't expose me like this. I'm on the committee. I'm supposed to enforce the rules, not be accused of breaking them. Daniels stepped closer, his shadow falling across her. And that's the problem. You've mistaken power for immunity. A murmur of approval rippled through the crowd. Karen's breathing quickened. She tried again weakly. I was just protecting the neighborhood. The sheriff's eyes hardened. No, you were protecting your control. And you crossed the line when you lied to law enforcement and harassed your neighbors. My wife's voice broke the tension, soft but firm. All over roses. Flowers from my mother's garden. The sheriff turned slightly, his voice dropping just enough to show respect. And you have every right to keep them here. HOA guidelines can't erase state property rights. He reached into his back pocket and pulled out a folded sheet of paper, creased from use. He opened it and began to read, his voice steady. California Civil Code Section 4753. No governing document shall prohibit the replacement or maintenance of landscaping with low water-using plants, including but not limited to roses. Gasps echoed. Even the officer raised his brows. Karen blinked. That's California law? Daniels nodded once. It is. Similar statutes exist across this country. States have recognized that HOAs can't override fundamental homeowner rights. Your fight here was lost before it even began. The neighbors erupted. Whispers, laughter, claps muffled behind palms. My wife pressed a hand to her mouth, eyes wet. So, we're safe. Daniels folded the paper again. Yes. And more than that, you're protected by law. Karen shook her head wildly, her voice breaking. No. That can't be true. I've been fighting this for years. Everyone listened to me. Everyone. Because they were afraid, Marcus said flatly. Not because you were right. The sheriff looked around, meeting the eyes of the gathered neighbors. Let this be clear for everyone. HOA rules exist for consistency. But they cannot and will not override state law. You all have rights that no committee can erase. For the first time that morning, the crowd broke into open applause. Phones captured it all. Karen standing frozen, the sheriff reading statutes, the community shifting like a tide. Karen's face burned scarlet. You're humiliating me, she hissed. Daniels didn't blink. No, Karen. You did that yourself. The officer tucked his notebook under his arm. Sheriff, do you want me to issue a warning citation today? The sheriff nodded once. Yes. Trespass and harassment. False report will be noted but not escalated, for now. Karen gasped as though she'd been struck. You can't do this to me. I am the HOA. Mrs. Decker barked a laugh. Not anymore, you're not. Karen's head whipped toward her, then back to the sheriff. I'll appeal this. I'll sue the board. Oh. Careful, Daniels interrupted. His voice carried the kind of warning that froze blood. Keep pushing and you'll cross the line into criminal charges. The crowd hushed. Even the wind seemed to pause. My wife whispered, it's finally over. But the sheriff shook his head slowly. Not quite. He leveled his gaze at Karen, his words deliberate. Karen, the law is clear. But so is your record. And if the HOA board does its job, you'll be facing more than just citations. You'll be facing accountability. Karen's hands shook, clutching her phone like a lifeline. She glanced at the neighbors filming, at the officer's notebook, at Danielle's unwavering eyes. For the first time all morning, her confidence broke entirely. Please, she whispered, voice trembling. Don't ruin me. Daniels didn't move. You did that yourself. And then, with every eye locked on him, he added, but this neighborhood deserves to hear all of it. Every violation. Every hidden rule you've bent for yourself. The crowd leaned in, hushed, waiting. Karen's face drained of color. No, she whispered. Not in front of them. The sheriff's voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. Then maybe you should have thought of that before you dragged them all into this. The officer flipped to a fresh page in his notebook. The pens of the neighbors' phones caught the light. And the sheriff took a breath, ready to read Karen's list of secrets aloud. The sheriff didn't raise his voice. You didn't need to. Every word carried through the cul-de-sac like a verdict, crisp and final. Karen, let's talk about your shed. Her sunglasses slipped an inch down her nose. My shed. He nodded once. The oversized structure you built behind your house last spring. No board approval. No city permit. Violation of setback requirements. That's 3 separate infractions. The crowd stirred, neighbors whispering, phones angling higher. Marcus chuckled. Knew that thing was too close to the fence. Karen's head whipped toward him. Stay out of this. But Daniels kept going, relentless. Then there are your surveillance cameras. At least 2 angled at other people's property. Recording children without parental consent. Do you know how many complaints I've had about those? Mrs. Decker raised her hand like she was in class. I filed one. She films my grandkids every time they chalk the driveway. Another voice, she's recorded our backyard parties. Creepy. The sheriff let the murmurs build before cutting through them. That's harassment, Karen. And it's illegal. Her lips trembled, but still she fought. I was protecting the neighborhood. Keeping watch. By breaking the very rules you claim to defend? Daniels asked. The officer by the cruiser spoke for the first time since taking notes. His tone was calm but firm. Ma'am, I'll need you to step over here so I can document this properly. Karen's eyes went wide. What? No. I'm not going anywhere with you. It's just for statements, he clarified. But if you refuse. Karen's voice pitched higher. This is harassment. You're ganging up on me. The sheriff's eyes narrowed. Karen, look around you. She did, and saw nothing but neighbors recording, whispering, nodding in agreement with him, not her. For the first time she looked small. I held my wife's hand, grounding her. She whispered, she's losing them. She's losing everything. Karen pointed a shaking finger at us. This is your fault. You brought this circus. The sheriff didn't flinch. No, Karen. You did. By screaming at a woman tending her garden, by trespassing, and by dragging law enforcement into your vendetta. The officer gestured again. Ma'am, please step over here. She backed up a step instead. No. I won't be treated like a criminal in my own neighborhood. The crowd gasped. Someone muttered, she's really going to dig in, isn't she? Danielle's voice sharpened, steel wrapped in calm. Karen, don't make this harder than it needs to be. Cooperate or you'll leave me no choice. Her sunglasses finally slipped to the pavement, forgotten. Her eyes darted wildly, searching for an ally, but found none. Mrs. Decker folded her arms. About time she gets a taste of her own medicine. Karen's breathing quickened. You people don't understand. If you let them keep those roses, you'll regret it. Today it's flowers, tomorrow it's junk cars and plastic flamingos. Marcus cut her off with a scoff. We'd take flamingos over your spying cameras any day. Laughter rippled through the crowd. Karen's face twisted. Laugh while you can. When the board hears about this, they'll back me. They always do. The sheriff's tone was final now. Not anymore. Not with what's on record today. He glanced at the officer. Go ahead. The officer unclipped a citation pad. The scratch of his pen was loud in the quiet street. Harassment. Trespass. Warning for misuse of emergency services. Karen's jaw dropped. A warning? For me? The officer didn't look up. Be glad it's only a warning. The neighbors leaned closer, phones catching every detail. Karen trembling, the officer writing, the sheriff looming steady as stone. Karen's voice cracked into a plea. You can't humiliate me like this. I'm the one who keeps this neighborhood together. No, Daniel said flatly. You're the one tearing it apart. Her mouth opened, then closed. The words were gone. The officer tore the slip from his pad and held it out. Ma'am. Take it. Karen stared at the paper like it was a snake. She didn't move. The sheriff stepped closer, voice low but sharp enough for all to hear. Karen. Take the citation. Or I'll consider you non-compliant and we'll take this further. The crowd hushed, the weight of the moment pressing in. Finally, with a trembling hand, Karen snatched the paper. She crushed it in her fist, her knuckles white. The neighbors erupted, some clapping, some cheering softly, relief spilling out like air from a balloon. Karen spun on them, eyes wild. Traitors? All of you. I protected you, and this is how you repay me. Her words fell flat. Phones stayed up, smiles spread, and for the first time, the power she wielded for years crumbled in front of her. The sheriff turned slightly toward the crowd. Let this be a reminder. No one is above the rules. And the law applies to everyone equally. Applause rose again, louder now. Karen shook with fury, her fists clenched tight around the citation. "This isn't finished," she spat. "You'll all see." The sheriff's eyes narrowed. "Careful, Karen. Because if you keep pushing, the next step won't be a warning." The silence that followed was heavy. My wife leaned into me, whispering, "It's ending. Finally." But Daniels glanced back at us, his expression grave. "Not yet. There's still one more thing they need to hear." The crowd hushed instantly. Karen's face drained of color again. "No," she whispered, shaking her head. "Not that." The sheriff's voice carried like thunder. "Yes, Karen. Exactly that." The paper crinkled loudly in Karen's fist, the sound brittle like her pride cracking. She stood frozen in the cul-de-sac, the sheriff on one side, the officer on the other, and an entire neighborhood watching. For years she had been the accuser, the enforcer, the self-proclaimed guardian of standards. But now she was cornered, her authority shredded in the sunlight. "Karen," the officer said evenly, "I need you to acknowledge the citation. That means saying aloud you received it." Karen shook her head, eyes darting around. "No. This is a setup. You're all against me. This isn't fair." Mrs. Decker crossed her arms. "Fair is my grandkids being able to play hopscotch without you filming them." Marcus added, "Fair is people planting roses without a 911 call." The neighbors murmured their agreement, voices rising in a steady tide. Karen's face flushed deep crimson. "I was trying to protect all of you," she shrieked, her voice cracking under the weight of desperation. "Do you think I wanted this? I sacrificed my weekends, my evenings, my peace, just to make sure this neighborhood stayed perfect." The sheriff stepped forward, his voice calm but carrying the weight of authority. "No one asked you to sacrifice anything, Karen. You chose to wield fear instead of cooperation." The crowd fell silent at his words. Karen's hands trembled as she crumpled the citation paper tighter. "I'm not saying it. I won't acknowledge anything. You can't force me." The officer glanced at Daniels, who gave a slow, deliberate nod. The officer clipped the citation pad back to his belt, then spoke in the same steady tone. "Ma'am, refusal to acknowledge a citation doesn't void it. It simply means I'll have to document noncompliance. That escalates things." Karen's breath hitched. "Escalates how?" The officer's hand brushed against the cuffs at his side, not threatening but a quiet reminder of where this could go. The message was clear. Karen stumbled back a step. "You wouldn't arrest me. Not in front of everyone." The sheriff's eyes narrowed. "If you force his hand, Karen, he will. And the whole neighborhood will see what happens when someone abuses authority." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Phones angled higher, zooming in on Karen's pale face. My wife gripped my hand tighter. "She's unraveling," she whispered. Karen's sunglasses, long forgotten on the ground, cracked under her heel as she shifted nervously. "You can't humiliate me like this," she whispered. "I've done too much. I've built too much." Danielle's tone softened just slightly. "Karen, humility isn't humiliation. This is your chance to stop. Take responsibility, acknowledge the warning, and let this go." For a flicker of a moment it seemed she might. Her lips parted, her shoulders slumped, but then her eyes hardened again. She straightened, turned to the neighbors and shouted, "You're all cowards. Without me this street would fall apart. Trash bins left out for days, fences painted any color, wild weeds everywhere. I kept us civilized." The crowd erupted, some with laughter, others with groans. Someone called out, "Civilized? You called the cops on roses." Karen's voice cracked again. "You'll regret mocking me. You'll regret siding with them." The officer stepped closer now, his hand resting lightly near his cuffs. "Ma'am, last warning. Step aside and acknowledge the citation." Karen froze, trembling. Her eyes filled with tears, but they burned with fury, not remorse. "This is tyranny. Tyranny in my own neighborhood." The sheriff shook his head. "No, Karen. This is justice." Silence fell like a gavel. Finally, Karen's resistance broke. Her shoulders sagged, her chin dropped, and her voice came out a whisper. "Fine. I acknowledge it." The officer nodded, jotting the note down. "Thank you. That's all that's required." But the moment of relief was short-lived. Karen's voice cracked louder now, desperation spilling out like floodwater. "But this isn't over. I'll take it to the board. I'll call an emergency meeting." "Oh." The sheriff's voice cut clean through her tirade. "Karen." She froze mid-sentence. He stepped closer, his voice dropping to a low warning. "If you try to retaliate against them or anyone else here, if you misuse your position again, I'll make sure it's the last time you ever sit on a committee in this county. Do you understand me?" Karen's lips trembled. You can't do that. Yes, I can, Daniels said. Because I'll put every violation you've hidden into the record. And once the board and the city see it, you won't just lose your seat, you'll face real penalties. The neighbors erupted, cheers, applause, even a few whistles. Relief spread across the cul-de-sac like sunlight breaking through storm clouds. Karen's eyes darted around, panicked. She tried to shout over them. Stop clapping. Stop it right now. You're encouraging lawlessness. But the sound only grew louder. My wife pressed her hands to her face, overwhelmed, tears streaming down her cheeks. She whispered through sobs, "They're clapping, for us." I wrapped an arm around her shoulders. For the first time all morning I allowed myself to breathe deeply, the knot in my chest loosening. Karen stumbled back toward the sidewalk, the crumpled citation still in her fist. She turned once, her voice hoarse. "You'll regret this day. Every one of you." The sheriff didn't even blink. "No, Karen. The only one who'll regret this day is you." The crowd's applause thundered louder. Phones captured every frame. And then, with the officer still watching, Karen backed away step by step, until she crossed her own lawn. Her curtain twitched as she slammed her front door shut behind her. The cul-de-sac exhaled as one. But Daniels didn't leave. He turned back to us, his expression steady but grave. "It's not finished yet. There's still one more piece you need to hear." The neighbors hushed again, the applause dying into anticipation. "What piece?" I asked, my voice careful. The sheriff looked toward Karen's shuttered house, then back at us. His words were deliberate, his tone heavy. "The HOA board has already been investigating her. And what they've found," he paused, letting the silence tighten like a noose, "is going to change everything you thought you knew about how this neighborhood has been run." Gasps rippled again. My wife gripped my arm, eyes wide. The neighbors leaned in, phones up once more. Karen's downfall wasn't just about her behavior this morning. It was bigger, deeper, and far from over. The slam of Karen's door echoed down the cul-de-sac like the end of an era. The applause faded into murmurs, the tension dissolving into a strange mix of relief and disbelief. Neighbors lingered in clusters, some still holding their phones high, others shaking their heads as though they had just witnessed something unreal. Sheriff Daniels remained steady in the center of the street, arms folded. He wasn't smiling, but his presence radiated closure. The officer clipped his citation pad back to his belt and leaned against the cruiser, scribbling final notes. For a moment the scene felt still, like the eye of a storm. Then Daniels turned toward us. "Mr. and Mrs. Miller," he said, his voice deliberate, "your roses stay. No one can touch them. Not Karen, not the board, not anyone. You have full rights under the law." My wife covered her mouth, shoulders trembling with relief. Tears slid down her cheeks, not from fear anymore but from release. "Thank you," she whispered. The sheriff gave a single nod. "Don't thank me. Thank the law. It was always on your side." The neighbors clapped again, softer this time, more like a gesture of solidarity than celebration. For the first time, I saw faces turn toward us with warmth instead of the silent hesitation that Karen had cultivated for years. But Daniels wasn't finished. He lifted his chin toward the officer. "Let's be clear. Karen isn't just facing that citation. The HOA board has been documenting her actions for months. Misuse of funds, unauthorized surveillance, abuse of power. This incident will push it over the edge." Gasps spread like wildfire. Mrs. Decker covered her mouth. Marcus muttered, "Knew it." The officer nodded. "We've received complaints, Sheriff. I'll make sure today's events are attached to her file. When the board reviews it, she'll have no standing left." Danielle's eyes swept the crowd. "This neighborhood deserves better than one person's tyranny. You'll have your chance to rebuild trust. But it starts with accountability." For the first time, neighbors spoke openly. "She fined me for a garden gnome. She threatened to take my kids' bikes if they left them on the sidewalk. She charged me for trimming a tree too early in the season." Each voice layered on the next, stories spilling into the open after years of silence. Karen's power had rested on fear, but the fear had broken. My wife gripped my arm tightly, whispering, "It's like the spell is gone." Daniels raised his hand, quieting the voices. "The board will meet this week. I'll be there. So will the officer. And I'll make sure every violation is read into the record." Relief washed through the crowd, but also a new determination. It wasn't just about roses anymore, it was about freedom from years of intimidation. The officer closed his notebook and gave me a respectful nod. "We'll file everything today. If Karen causes trouble again, call immediately." With this on record, she won't get a second chance. Thank you, I said, my voice steady now. Daniels placed a firm hand on my shoulder. You stood your ground. That matters. Don't let anyone take that from you. I nodded, swallowing hard. For months, I tried to keep peace, to avoid conflict, to believe Karen would eventually back off. But now I saw that silence had only fed her. Today, standing firm had finally broken her hold. The neighbors shifted, some dispersing, others coming closer. Mrs. Decker hugged my wife. Those roses are beautiful. Don't you dare move them. Marcus clapped me on the back. About time someone took her down. Even quiet Mr. Patel gave a small smile. You've made us all braver. My wife laughed through her tears, the sound shaky but real. For the first time in months, maybe years, she looked free. But as relief settled in, Sheriff Daniels raised his voice one final time. Let this be a lesson. HOAs aren't above the law. And bullies only win if you let them. From today forward, you don't have to be afraid. Applause thundered, not just polite claps but real, heartfelt applause. Some neighbors even cheered, their voices echoing across the cul-de-sac. Through the noise, the sheriff leaned close to us. His words were quiet, meant only for us. This isn't just about roses. It's about your right to live with dignity. Hold on to that. I nodded, gripping my wife's hand tighter. Across the street, Karen's curtains fluttered. She was watching, no doubt, seething behind glass. The community she once controlled was slipping from her grasp, and she knew it. The officer closed his car door and started the engine, the cruiser's rumble grounding the moment. He leaned out the window briefly. We'll be in touch with the board. Stay calm. You're in the clear. Then he drove slowly out of the cul-de-sac, leaving silence behind him. Daniels lingered, scanning the street one last time. His presence was enough to keep the quiet heavy and respectful. Finally he tipped his hat. Enjoy your roses. And with that, he turned and walked back toward his porch, every step measured, as though he knew the neighborhood needed the weight of his shadow just a little longer. When he disappeared inside, the spell fully broke. Neighbors came alive, talking, laughing, even smiling at one another. The cul-de-sac, which had felt like a stage for conflict, felt like a neighborhood again. My wife knelt and touched the petals of the roses. She whispered, "We did it, Mom." I crouched beside her, wrapping her in my arms. Around us, the crowd began to disperse, voices lighter, steps easier. Children laughed faintly down the block, as though joy had been waiting behind a door, ready to return the moment Karen's grip loosened. But even in that relief, I knew it wasn't finished. Karen's house loomed across the street, her curtains still twitching. Her door had slammed shut, but her threats still echoed in my ears. This isn't over. You'll regret this. And as the sun began to dip lower, casting long shadows across the cul-de-sac, I couldn't shake the feeling that her fight wasn't done, that the board meeting would be her last stand. The roses swayed gently in the breeze, resilient, unbroken. For today justice was served. But tomorrow might bring another storm. The sky over the cul-de-sac had shifted to gold by the time the last clusters of neighbors drifted home. The sun stretched long shadows across the street, painting the roses in soft amber light. What had started as a morning of humiliation and shouting had ended in something none of us expected. Solidarity. My wife knelt by the roses again, fingertips brushing petals as if confirming they were still there, still safe. I crouched beside her, my arm around her shoulders. For the first time all day, I could feel her body loosen, the weight lifting from her chest. "They're still standing," she whispered. "After all of it, they're still here." I kissed her temple. "And so are we." From across the street, Karen's curtains twitched again. She hadn't come back out since slamming her door. Her house, once a fortress of judgment, now looked smaller, darker, as though it carried her shame. Every so often, a silhouette shifted behind the blinds, watching. But nobody paid her any mind anymore. The spell she held over the neighborhood was broken. Mrs. Decker walked over with a small vase in her hands. Inside were daisies, clipped fresh from her yard. "For you," she said, placing them gently beside the roses. "Your flowers aren't weeds. They're welcome here." Tears welled in my wife's eyes. She whispered, "Thank you." Marcus strode over, still in his work boots, dust on his shirt. He gave a curt nod. "If she tries this again, call me. You won't be standing alone." Others followed, Mr. Patel with a nod of respect, a younger couple we barely knew offering smiles, even kids waving shyly from their bikes. Piece by piece, the neighborhood stitched itself back together in the fading light. And then the sheriff reappeared. He wasn't in uniform now, just jeans and a flannel shirt, but his presence carried the same weight. He stopped at our walkway, eyes sweeping over the roses, the gathered neighbors, the quiet street. "Beautiful flowers," he said simply. "They were my mother's," my wife replied, her voice steady. He nodded. "Then they belong here. And so do you." The crowd hushed, listening. Danielle's voice carried not just authority, but something deeper: respect, reassurance. "Don't forget what you saw today. Karen's power didn't come from rules. It came from fear. And when fear ended, so did her hold on you. Remember that." Heads nodded. Murmurs of agreement spread. He looked directly at us. "You stood your ground. That mattered. You gave the rest of them permission to stand too." I swallowed hard, emotion thick in my throat. My wife squeezed my hand. The sheriff tipped his hat. "Take care of your garden. I'll see you at the board meeting." And then he walked back toward his house, leaving the cul-de-sac with a quiet sense of order restored. One by one the neighbors peeled away. The applause and murmurs faded, replaced by the normal sounds of suburban life. Kids calling from porches, dogs barking, sprinklers hissing across lawns. The storm was over. We stood in the yard long after everyone had gone. The roses glowed in the last light of day, fragile yet unbroken. My wife knelt again, whispering a thank you only the flowers and I could hear. And in that moment I thought about what the sheriff said, that it wasn't about roses at all. It was about dignity. About standing tall even when someone tried to tear you down. Across the street, Karen's house stayed dark. Curtains drawn. Silence heavy. For once, she was the one shut away while the rest of us breathed freely. I turned to my wife. "What do you think happens now?" She looked up at me, her hands still on the soil. "We live. We plant. We grow." I smiled. "And the roses stay." She nodded, tears glinting in the fading light. "The roses stay." The cul-de-sac stretched quiet and calm, the air warm with the promise of peace. For today at least justice had been served. And to everyone listening, I'll leave you with this. What would you have done if your neighbor called the cops on you over flowers? Would you have stood your ground? Because sometimes standing firm isn't just about what's in your yard. It's about what's in your heart. So tell me in the comments, have you ever faced a Karen in your neighborhood? How did you handle it? And if you believe in protecting what matters, whether it's flowers, family, or dignity, hit that like button. Subscribe for more true stories from the heart of suburban life, because you never know when the next HOA showdown might unfold.